She thought she was finally home. She had no idea she was about to be arrested on her own front lawn. On a quiet Saturday morning, Officer Ryan Keller, a cop with a spotless record and a hidden bias, confronted, humiliated, and handcuffed a black woman for the crime of standing in her own yard. Ridiculed for the elegant red blouse she wore, treated like a burglar at her own doorstep, and degraded in front of the very neighbors she'd just moved next to. She was paraded as a threat, an intruder to be removed, a suspect with no right to defend herself. But the officer never asked who he was cuffing. Before this morning, Nia Brooks had presided over the most powerful courtroom in the state, a woman whose entire career was built on the very Justice Keller was violating. Keller thought he was protecting his neighborhood. In truth, he was sealing his own fate. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe and hit that like button, because tomorrow's story will shake you even more than this one. The Saturday morning sun arrived like a blessing over Sycamore Lane, pouring soft golden light across trimmed hedges, stone pathways, and sprawling estates that sat like monuments to success. This was the kind of street where silence wasn't just preferred, it was enforced. No loud music, no clutter, no surprises. This was Officer Ryan Keller's domain. For 12 years, he had patrolled these roads with pride, believing he wasn't just enforcing the law, he was preserving a lifestyle, a peaceful, orderly, and unspoken exclusive way of life. So when he saw her standing in the yard of the old Whitmore estate, everything in him went still. The woman was black, poised, and strikingly elegant. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, silver earrings catching the light. She wore a tailored red blouse embroidered with delicate white floral patterns that shimmered as she moved. It was the kind of garment that spoke of taste, confidence, and means, the kind of thing Keller associated with charity galas or courtroom ceremonies. Not someone unpacking boxes on a street. The Whitmore house had just sold 2 weeks ago. Keller had been watching, waiting, hoping the new owners would fit the mold. But now, standing in that driveway with keys in one hand and a leather handbag in the other, was his worst assumption made flesh. He pulled his patrol car to the curb with a deliberate slowness, the engine idling like a predator circling prey. The street was empty. There was no emergency, no call, no complaint, just him and her, and a decision already made. Nia Brooks had been admiring the wraparound porch she'd fallen in love with during the final walkthrough. The house was everything she'd worked for, spacious, sunlit, surrounded by trees that swayed gently in the breeze. She'd earned this. Decades of clawing her way through a legal system that wasn't built for her. Nights spent writing opinions that would outlive her. A seat on the state Supreme Court that had cost her everything and given her even more. This home was her reward, her refuge, her declaration that she had arrived, not as a guest, but as an equal. She heard the car door slam and turned. Her expression shifted from peaceful contemplation to measured awareness. She had seen this look before. In courtrooms, in waiting rooms, in places where her presence was questioned before her name was even known. The officer approached slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel driveway. His hand hovered near his belt, not on his weapon, but close enough to send a message. "Morning," Keller said, his tone flat and cold, stripped of any courtesy. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just stared. His eyes moved from her face to the house, then back to her blouse, as if the fabric itself were evidence of something out of place. Nia met his gaze without flinching. She had spent a career staring down hostility. This was no different. "Good morning, officer," she replied, her voice calm, controlled, dignified. Keller's jaw tightened. He didn't like her tone. Too steady, too unbothered. "You live here?" he asked, though it sounded more like an accusation than a question. Nia tilted her head slightly. "I do. Since when?" "Since I bought it. 2 weeks ago." Her answers were direct, unshaken. That seemed to bother him even more. "Got any ID?" Keller pressed, stepping closer, his shadow falling across her. Nia's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from recognition. She knew exactly what this was, and she knew where it could go. "Officer, I'm standing in my own driveway." Is there a reason you're asking me for identification? Keller's expression hardened. His hand dropped to his belt. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to cooperate. We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. Suspicious activity, Nia repeated, her voice edged with steel beneath the silk. Such as, people who don't belong. The words hung in the air like smoke. Nia didn't move, didn't blink, but something shifted in her posture, a sharpening, a readiness. She had presided over cases like this, testified about patterns like this, written rulings that condemned behavior exactly like this. And now, she was living it. Keller took another step forward. I'm not going to ask again. Show me your ID, or I'm going to assume you're trespassing. Nia's fingers tightened around her keys. She could feel the weight of the moment, the choice between compliance and confrontation, between silence and resistance. But before she could respond, Keller's radio crackled. He ignored it. His eyes never left hers. And in that moment, Nia Brooks understood something with absolute clarity. This officer had no idea who he was threatening, but he was about to find out. Officer Ryan Keller moved up the driveway with the kind of practiced confidence that came from years of never being questioned. His stride was measured, deliberate, each step a small assertion of control. His uniform was immaculate, his badge catching the morning sun like a shield of unearned righteousness. He stopped 6 feet away from Nia, close enough to dominate the space, but far enough to maintain the illusion of professionalism. So, he said, his voice clipped and formal, but threaded with disbelief. What exactly are you doing here? Not can I help you? Not is everything all right? What are you doing here? The question itself was an accusation. Nia met his eyes without hesitation. Her voice was calm, clear, and deliberate. I just moved in. For words. Simple. Factual. Unapologetic. Keller's eyes flicked past her to the house. The pristine white columns, the navy roof, the double oak doors with brass handles. His gaze lingered there for a beat too long, as if he were trying to reconcile the image of this woman with the value of this property. He didn't believe her. He took a slow step to his right, then another, beginning a lazy circle around her. It was a tactic he'd used 100 times before, on street corners, at traffic stops, in moments where his presence alone was meant to break someone down. It was a physical assertion of power, a reminder that he controlled this interaction. Nia didn't turn to follow him. She stood facing forward, shoulders square, chin level, but her peripheral vision tracked every move. Keller noted the leather handbag on the porch steps, the rolling suitcase near the door, the set of house keys still dangling from her fingers. He ignored all of it. You just moved in, he repeated, his tone laced with skepticism. When exactly? The closing was finalized on Thursday. I'm moving the rest of my things in today. Keller stopped mid-circle, now standing slightly behind her left shoulder, close enough that she could feel his presence like a shadow. Uh-huh, he muttered. And you got proof of that? Nia turned her head just slightly, enough to glance at him from the corner of her eye. Proof that I own my own home? She asked, her voice still measured, but now edged with something sharper. Keller's jaw tightened. He didn't like her tone, didn't like the way she stayed so composed. In his experience, innocent people got nervous. Guilty people got defensive. But this woman? She was neither, and that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Ma'am, we've had reports of recent burglaries in this neighborhood, Keller said, his voice taking on a rehearsed authority, the kind of line he'd used dozens of times to justify dozens of stops. Recent burglaries, Nia repeated quietly, almost to herself. That's right. So you can understand why I need to verify who you are and what you're doing on this property. Nia turned fully now, facing him head on. Her expression was unreadable. Not angry, not afraid, just present. Officer, she said slowly, I've given you my explanation. I'm standing in my own driveway, with my own keys and my own home. If there have been burglaries in the area, I'm sure you have descriptions, reports, evidence. Do I match any of those? Keller's hand drifted toward his belt again, not to his weapon, but to his radio. A subconscious gesture. Attell, I'm the one asking the questions here, he said, his voice hardening. Nia said nothing, just held his gaze. Across the street, a curtain shifted. An older white woman stood at her window, arms crossed, watching. She didn't come outside, didn't call out, just watched. 2 houses down, a man in a polo shirt paused while retrieving his newspaper. He stared for a long moment, then looked away and went back inside. The neighbors were frozen, not by fear, but by the badge. By the unspoken rule that whatever the officer was doing, it must be justified. It must be right. Because if it wasn't, then they'd have to do something. And doing nothing was easier. Keller completed his circle, now standing directly in front of Nia again. He crossed his arms, his posture wide and immovable. "I'm going to need to see some identification," he said, "and proof of ownership. Deed, mortgage papers, something official." Nia's fingers tightened slightly around her keys, the only outward sign of the tension coiling inside her. "Those documents are inside the house," she said evenly. "Then go get them. You want me to enter my home and retrieve paperwork to prove to you that it's my home?" Keller's eyes narrowed. "That's exactly what I want." Nia stood perfectly still. Her mind was moving faster than her body, calculating, weighing, strategizing. She had spent decades in courtrooms dissecting moments like this, parsing language, identifying overreach. This was overreach, but she also knew what resistance looked like to a man like Keller. She knew how quickly noncompliance became threat, how quickly a traffic stop became a tragedy. "I'll get the documents," she said quietly. Keller nodded, satisfied. "Good, and I'll be right here waiting." Nia turned toward the front door, her red blouse catching the light as she moved. She climbed the 3 steps to the porch, her heels clicking softly against the stone. She slid the key into the lock, and then she stopped, because behind her, she heard Keller's boots on the gravel. He was following her. "Officer," Nia said without turning around, "I'm retrieving the documents you requested. There's no need for you to enter my home." Keller stopped at the base of the steps. His hand was now resting on his holster. "Ma'am, until I verify your identity and your claim to this property, I'm treating this as a potential trespassing situation, which means I have the right to ensure you're not destroying evidence or accessing weapons." Nia's breath caught, not from fear, but from disbelief. She turned slowly, her eyes locking onto his. "You believe I'm trespassing," she said, her voice low and controlled. "So your solution is to follow me inside the home you think I'm trespassing in." Keller's face flushed slightly. "That's correct." Nia stared at him for a long, silent moment. And in that silence, something shifted. She had tried calm. She had tried compliance. She had tried reason. None of it mattered. Because to Officer Ryan Keller, she would never belong here. Not because of what she'd done, but because of who she was. Nia's hand fell away from the door. "No," she said simply. Keller blinked. "Excuse me." "I said no. You're not entering my home without a warrant." The air between them crackled. Keller's expression darkened. His voice dropped to a dangerous calm. "Ma'am, if you obstruct this investigation, I will place you under arrest." Nia didn't flinch. "Then do what you feel you need to do, officer." Keller's hand moved to his cuffs. And across the street, the woman in the window finally looked away. If you want to see what happens next, hit that subscribe button and drop a like, because this story is far from over. And comment below. Have you ever been judged before anyone knew your name? Let's talk about it. Officer Ryan Keller's jaw clenched as he stared at the woman standing on the porch steps. His hand hovered over his handcuffs, fingers twitching with the kind of authority that had never been challenged. Not here, not on his streets. "Ma'am," he said, his voice hardening into something colder, sharper, "I'm placing you under investigation for trespassing on private property." The words landed like stones. Nia's expression didn't change. She didn't raise her voice, didn't move. She simply looked at him with the kind of steady, unshakable calm that only comes from years of facing down injustice in rooms where your presence alone was considered a threat. "Officer Keller," she said evenly, her voice cutting through the morning air like a blade wrapped in silk. "This is my home." 5 words. Clear, direct, undeniable. Keller's eyes narrowed. He heard her. He understood her. But to him, her calm wasn't cooperation. It was defiance. Her repetition wasn't clarity. It was resistance. and resistance in his world demanded correction. "I've already told you," he said, stepping forward, his boots heavy on the driveway. "Until I verify that claim, you are considered a suspect. Now step away from the door and put your hands where I can see them." Nia didn't move, not because she was resisting, but because she was calculating. Every word, every gesture, every legal line he was towing and crossing. "Officer, I have committed no crime. I have shown no aggression. I have provided you with an explanation. You have no probable cause to detain me." Her words were measured, deliberate, laced with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime wielding the law like a scalpel. But Keller wasn't listening to the law. He was listening to his instincts. And his instincts told him that this woman, standing in this neighborhood, in that blouse, with that tone, didn't belong. And if she wouldn't submit, he would make her submit. His hand moved, not to his radio, not to his cuffs, to his weapon. Time seemed to fracture. The world narrowed to a single, horrible moment as Keller's fingers wrapped around the grip of his service pistol. The holster clicked open. The weight of the gun shifted in his hand, and then it cleared the leather. Nia's breath caught, not in fear, but in recognition. She had read about moments like this, presided over cases built on moments like this, signed rulings that condemned officers for moments exactly like this. But she had never lived it. Not like this. Keller raised the gun in a smooth, practiced motion, his arm extending as the barrel lifted toward her. He didn't point it at the ground, didn't keep it low in a defensive stance. He raised it and pressed it forward until it was inches from her temple. The image was stark, brutal, undeniable. A dark uniform, a black gun, a red blouse embroidered with white flowers shimmering in the sunlight. And behind them, the pristine white columns of a mansion that was supposed to represent safety, success, arrival. Now it was a backdrop to a threat. Nia stood frozen, not from terror, but from the suffocating weight of understanding. This was no longer about identification. It wasn't about burglaries or suspicious activity. This was about power. And the gun in her face was his way of reminding her that he had it, and she didn't. "Don't move." Keller's voice was louder now, sharper, louder than the situation required, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, loud enough to justify whatever came next. Nia's hands remained at her sides. Her body was still, but inside, her mind was racing, mapping exits, calculating outcomes, preparing for the worst. Because she knew what happened to black bodies that moved at the wrong moment. She knew what happened when compliance wasn't enough. She knew the statistics. The names, the verdicts. Across the street, hidden partially behind an oak tree, a neighbor stood with her phone raised. The screen glowed faintly in the morning light. The red recording dot blinked silently. She didn't say anything, didn't shout, didn't intervene. She just filmed, because in this moment, a video was safer than a voice. Keller's finger rested along the side of the trigger guard, not on the trigger itself, but close, too close. His breathing was controlled, his posture wide and aggressive. "I said don't move," he barked again, even though Nia hadn't moved at all. This wasn't about safety. This was theater, a performance of dominance designed to humiliate, to break, to remind her, and anyone watching, who held the power here. Nia's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, but every word was carved from stone. "My name is Nia Brooks. I am a justice on the state Supreme Court, and you are violating my civil rights." For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Keller's face. Confusion, doubt, but it passed as quickly as it came, replaced by the same rigid certainty that had brought him to this moment. "I don't care who you say you are," he shot back. "Right now, you're a suspect refusing to comply with a lawful order." Nia's eyes didn't leave his. "There is nothing lawful about this." Keller's jaw tightened. His grip on the gun didn't waver. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Now, Nia didn't move immediately. Not out of defiance, but because she needed one more second to breathe. One more second to hold on to the dignity he was trying to strip away. And then, slowly she turned. Her back to the gun. Her hands rising. Her wrists coming together. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed across the quiet street like a gavel falling. Keller pulled the cuffs tight, tighter than necessary. Tight enough that the metal bit into her skin. Tight enough to leave marks. "You're under arrest for trespassing and obstruction," he announced, his voice loud and performative. Nia said nothing, but in the silence, her mind was already working. She knew the law. She knew her rights. And she knew exactly how many lines Officer Ryan Keller had just crossed. He thought this was over. He thought he'd won. But Nia Brooks had spent her entire career turning moments like this into precedents. And this moment was going to cost him everything. Keller guided her down the porch steps, his hand firm on her arm. The red blouse fluttered slightly in the breeze. The key she'd been holding fell to the ground with a soft clink. Across the street, the recording continued. 2 houses down, another curtain shifted. And somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. But no one came outside. No one intervened. No one said a word. Because in neighborhoods like this, the badge was the final word. And the gun made sure of it. Keller opened the back door of his patrol car and placed his hand on Nia's head, guiding her inside with the same rehearsed motion he'd performed hundreds of times before. The door slammed shut, and as the car pulled away from the curb, Nia sat in the back seat, cuffed, silent but not broken. Not even close. Because Officer Ryan Keller had made one critical mistake. He never asked her name. And now, he was going to learn it in a courtroom. Want to see what happens when the most powerful judge in the state walks into the precinct in handcuffs? Hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and drop a comment telling us. Have you ever been judged before anyone in your story? This is far from over. The patrol car sat idling at the curb, engine humming low like a predator at rest. Inside, Officer Ryan Keller stood by the rear door, one hand resting on the roof of the vehicle, the other still gripping his holstered weapon. His posture was relaxed now, almost casual, as if what he'd just done was routine. Through the window, Nia Brooks sat in the back seat, her wrists cuffed behind her, her red blouse wrinkled from the rough handling. Her face was unreadable, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the dashboard, somewhere Keller couldn't see. But he kept talking anyway. "You know," Keller said, his voice loud enough to carry through the glass, "I've got to hand it to you. That's a nice act you've got going. Real convincing." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Supreme Court Justice. That's a new one." He leaned closer to the window, his breath fogging the glass slightly. "Let me guess. You're the housekeeper, right? Maybe a live-in caretaker? That would make more sense. I mean, no offense, but someone like you doesn't just buy a place like this." Nia didn't respond, didn't turn her head, didn't flinch. Her silence wasn't submission. It was strategy. Every word he spoke was being cataloged, indexed, stored. Every assumption he made was another piece of evidence she would use to dismantle him. Because Nia Brooks had learned long ago that silence could be the sharpest weapon in the room. Keller straightened up, smirking to himself. He pulled out his radio and clicked the button. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need backup at 1247 Sycamore Lane. Suspect in custody. Possible trespassing and obstruction. Send another unit for transport." The radio crackled back. "Copy that, 47. Unit 22 en route. ETA 4 minutes. Keller clipped the radio back onto his belt and crossed his arms, settling into the performance he'd already constructed in his mind. By the time backup arrived, the story would be set. She was uncooperative. She refused to provide ID. She escalated the situation. It was a script he'd written before, and always worked. For minutes passed in thick, suffocating silence. The street remained quiet. The recording neighbor had ducked back inside, but left her phone propped in the window, still filming. Another resident walked their dog on the opposite sidewalk, glancing over briefly before quickening their pace. No one stopped. No one asked questions. Then, the sound of tires on asphalt. A second patrol car rolled up slowly, parking just behind Keller's vehicle. The door opened, and Officer Miguel Vasquez stepped out. Younger, less certain, his uniform still crisp in a way that suggested he hadn't been worn down by the job yet. Vasquez approached cautiously, his eyes moving between Keller, the house, and the woman sitting calmly in the back seat of the patrol car. Something felt off. "Hey, Keller," Vasquez said, his tone neutral. "What view we got?" Keller gestured toward the car with a lazy wave. Trespasser. Refused to provide ID. Got hostile when I asked her to verify ownership. Vasquez glanced at the house again. The pristine lawn, the luxury SUV parked in the driveway with dealer plates still visible, the suitcase still sitting near the front door. His brow furrowed slightly. She say anything? Oh, she said plenty, Keller replied with a smirk. Claims she's some kind of judge. State Supreme Court, no less. Vasquez's expression shifted, just slightly. His eyes moved back to the woman in the car. She sat perfectly still, her posture upright despite the cuffs, her gaze forward. She didn't look panicked. She didn't look guilty. She looked patient. Did you run her name? Vasquez asked carefully. Keller shrugged. She wouldn't give it. Refused to cooperate. Vasquez hesitated. His instincts were whispering something his training hadn't prepared him for. This doesn't add up. But Keller was senior. Keller had been doing this for over a decade, and challenging him in front of a suspect would be a career-limiting move. So Vasquez said nothing. Keller walked back toward the car and opened the rear door. Nia turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes for the first time since she'd been cuffed. All right, Keller said, his voice dripping with false professionalism. We're going to transport you to the station. You'll be processed there. If you really are who you say you are, I'm sure it'll all get cleared up. Nia's voice, when it finally came, was quiet, controlled, surgical. Officer Keller, she said, each word measured and deliberate, you have violated my Fourth Amendment rights. You have detained me without probable cause. You have brandished a weapon without justification. And you have done so in front of witnesses and recording devices. Keller's smirk faltered, just for a second. Nia continued, her tone never rising, never breaking. I will be filing a formal complaint with the Oversight Board. I will be requesting a full investigation into your conduct. And I will be referring this matter to my legal counsel, who, I assure you, will be very interested in your behavior today. Keller's face flushed. His jaw clenched. Is that a threat? No, officer, Nia replied evenly. It's a promise. Keller slammed the door shut, harder than necessary. He turned to Vasquez, his expression tight. Let's get her out of here. But before either of them could move, Keller's radio crackled to life. Unit 47, this is dispatch. Keller grabbed the radio, irritation flashing across his face. Go ahead, dispatch. There was a pause, a long one. Then the dispatcher's voice came through again, slower this time, uncertain. 47. We've received a call from the State Attorney General's office. They're requesting immediate confirmation of your location and the status of any detainees in your custody. Keller froze. Vasquez's eyes widened. The radio crackled again. They've also requested the name of anyone currently detained. Can you confirm? Keller's hand tightened around the radio. His throat felt dry. His mind raced, trying to piece together how the Attorney General's office could possibly know about this fast. He clicked the button, his voice strained. Dispatch. Suspect refused to identify herself. No name available at this time. Another pause. Then a different voice came through the radio. Older. Authoritative. Cold. Officer Keller, this is Captain Brandt. Stand by for instructions. Do not transport the detainee. Do not move from your location. I'm en route. The line went dead. Keller stood there, radio in hand, staring at nothing. Vasquez shifted uncomfortably. Keller, what the hell is going on? Keller didn't answer. Because for the first time since he'd pulled up to this house, doubt crept in. Across the street, the phone kept recording. Inside the patrol car, Nia Brooks sat in silence, her expression unchanged. She didn't need to say anything else. The wheels were already in motion. Keller had made his choices. He'd drawn his weapon. He'd made his accusations. He'd laughed off her warnings. And now, 10 minutes of arrogance were about to unravel an entire career. Because the truth was already on its way. And it was coming with badges, oversight, and consequences. Keller glanced back at the woman in the car. For the first time, her calm didn't feel like defiance. It felt like certainty. And that terrified him more than anything she could have said. What happens when a captain arrives and realizes who's sitting in cuffs? Subscribe now, hit that like button, and comment below. Have you ever watched someone destroy their own life in real time? Because that's exactly what's about to happen. The radio silence stretched on like a hell breath. Officer Ryan Keller stood frozen beside his patrol car, the radio still clutched in his hand, the last word from Captain Brandt echoing in his mind. Do not transport. Do not move. I'm en route. Vasquez shifted his weight from foot to foot, his eyes darting between Keller and the woman sitting calmly in the back seat. The younger officer could feel the air changing, something unspoken, something heavy settling over the scene like storm clouds gathering. Then the radio crackled again. Unit 47, this is dispatch. Keller clicked the button, his voice tight. Go ahead. Can you confirm the exact address of your current location? Keller's brow furrowed. They already knew. He'd called it in. Why were they asking again? 1247 Sycamore Lane, he said slowly. Another pause. Longer this time. Copy that. And Officer Keller, can you provide the full name of the individual currently in your custody? Keller's stomach tightened. His jaw clenched. Negative dispatch. Subject refused to provide identification. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, a different voice came through. Not the dispatcher, not Captain Brandt. This one was sharper, colder, layered with authority that didn't ask permission. Officer Keller, this is Deputy Chief Angela Morrison. I need you to listen very carefully. Keller's hand trembled slightly on the radio. Deputy Chief Morrison didn't get involved in street-level calls. She didn't show up for trespassing arrests or routine detentions. She was internal oversight, policy enforcement, career endings. Yes, ma'am, Keller said, his voice suddenly smaller. You're currently detaining Justice Nia Brooks of the state Supreme Court. Confirm you understand what I just said. The world tilted. Keller's vision blurred at the edges. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Vasquez's eyes went wide. He took an involuntary step back, his hand moving to his chest as if he'd been struck. Officer Keller. Morrison's voice came through again, sharper now. Confirm. Keller's throat felt like sandpaper. He forced the words out. Confirmed. Good. Additional units are en route to your location. You are to remain exactly where you are. Do not engage further with Justice Brooks. Do not attempt to justify or explain your actions. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. The line went silent. Keller lowered the radio slowly, his hand shaking. He stared at the back of the patrol car, where Nia Brooks still sat, unchanged, unmoved, her posture as composed as it had been 15 minutes ago. She had told him. She had told him exactly who she was. And he had laughed. Vasquez stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Keller, man, what did you do? Keller didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was racing through every moment of the last 20 minutes, every word he'd said, every choice he'd made. The gun, the cuffs, the mockery, the refusal to listen. All of it recorded, all of it witnessed, all of it irreversible. 2 minutes later, 3 more patrol cars arrived in quick succession, parking in a staggered line along the street. Doors opened. Officers stepped out, but none of them approached Keller. They stood at a distance, watching, waiting. Then a black SUV pulled up, and Sergeant Dean Holloway stepped out. Holloway was a 25-year veteran with a reputation for 2 things: fairness and zero tolerance for misconduct. He was the kind of supervisor who'd walk through fire for his officers, but only if they deserved it. He took one look at the scene, and his face went stone cold. Holloway walked directly to Keller, his boots heavy on the pavement. He stopped inches away, his voice low and lethal. Where's your weapon, Keller? Keller glanced down. His hand was still resting on his holster. Holstered, sir. When did you holster it? Keller hesitated. A few minutes ago. How long was it drawn? Silence. How long? Maybe 3 for minutes. Holloway's jaw tightened. And during that time, was Justice Brooks armed? No, sir. Was she aggressive? No, sir. Did she threaten you in any way? No, sir. Holloway stared at him for a long, brutal moment. Then he shook his head slowly, disbelief and disgust written across his face. Internal Affairs has been notified. They're sending a team now. Keller's stomach dropped. Holloway turned to Vasquez. Get her out of the vehicle. Remove the cuffs. Now. Vasquez moved quickly, opening the rear door of the patrol car. Nia Brooks turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes. "Ma'am," Vasquez said, his voice shaking, "I'm going to remove the cuffs." I apologize for this situation." Nia said nothing, just turned her back toward him. Vasquez unlocked the cuffs with trembling hands. The metal fell away, and Nia slowly brought her arms forward, rubbing her wrists where the cuffs had bitten into her skin. Red marks lined her dark skin, evidence that would photograph well in a courtroom. She stepped out of the car with quiet dignity, smoothing her blouse, adjusting the collar. She looked at Holloway, then at Keller. Keller couldn't meet her eyes. Holloway stepped forward. "Justice Brooks, I'm Sergeant Holloway. On behalf of this department, I want to apologize for..." Nia raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Save it, Sergeant," she said quietly. "Apologies won't undo what happened here, but accountability will." Holloway nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." Across the street, the neighbor who had been recording finally stepped outside. She approached cautiously, phone still in hand. Holloway noticed her immediately. He walked over, his tone shifting to something softer. "Ma'am, were you recording this incident?" The neighbor hesitated, then nodded. "I'm going to need that footage," Holloway said. "It's evidence now. We can do this cooperatively, or I could get a warrant, but either way, we need it." The neighbor glanced past him at Nia, who gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I'll send it to you," the neighbor said. "All of it." Holloway returned to the scene. He turned to Keller, his voice now formal, procedural, and devastating. "Officer Keller, you are being placed on immediate administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Your badge and service weapon will be surrendered at the station. You're not to discuss this incident with anyone except your union representative and IA investigators. Do you understand?" Keller's voice was hollow. "Yes, sir." Holloway gestured toward Vasquez. "Escort him back to the station. Separate vehicle." Vasquez nodded and motioned for Keller to follow. Keller walked toward the patrol car like a man heading to his own execution. He glanced back once, just once, at the house, the woman, the scene he had created. Nia Brooks stood on her own front lawn now, keys back in her hand, her red blouse catching the sunlight. She wasn't angry. She wasn't triumphant. She was simply present. And in that moment, Keller understood something with absolute, crushing clarity. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had destroyed himself. Every action, every word, every second of that gun being raised had been a choice. And now, those choices would follow him for the rest of his life. Holloway approached Nia one more time. "Justice Brooks, if you need medical attention, or if you'd like to file a formal report." "I'll be filing a full report," Nia said calmly, "through my attorney, and I'll be requesting a full review of Officer Keller's disciplinary record." Holloway nodded. "Understood." Nia turned and walked back toward her front door. She climbed the steps slowly, picked up the key she dropped, and unlocked the door. She stepped inside and closed it behind her. The street fell silent. The patrol cars began to pull away, one by one. And across town, in the back of a police cruiser, Ryan Keller stared out the window at nothing, realizing that 10 minutes of arrogance had just cost him everything. Because the woman he'd cuffed wasn't just powerful. She was the law itself, and the law had a very long memory. Want to see what happens when this case hits the courtroom? Subscribe, like, and drop a comment. Have you ever seen power flip in an instant? Because this story is about to get even more intense. The video surfaced 72 hours later, not through official channels, not through a press release or a carefully worded statement from the department. It appeared on social media at 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday night, uploaded by an anonymous account with no profile picture and no followers. Within an hour, it had been shared 2,000 times. By morning, it was everywhere. The footage was clear, unflinching, devastating. It showed everything. Officer Ryan Keller approaching. The circling. The questions laced with disbelief. The refusal to listen. And then, the moment that would define the entire case. The gun clearing the holster. The barrel rising. Pressing forward. Inches from Nia Brooks' temple. Media outlets froze the frame at that exact moment. The dark uniform, the black weapon, the red blouse, the white mansion in the background. The image became a symbol overnight, of bias, of power, of violence disguised as protection. Cable news ran it on loop. Op-eds dissected every second. Legal analysts debated probable cause, Fourth Amendment violations, use of force protocols. And the hashtags began to trend. Hashtag Justice for Justice. Hashtag Nia Brooks. Hashtag Sycamore Shame. Public outrage didn't simmer. It erupted. Within 48 hours of the video going viral, the state attorney general announced a formal investigation, not just into Officer Keller, but into the entire department's practices. And that's when the patterns began to emerge. The attorney general's office pulled records going back 10 years. Complaint logs, internal affairs reports, disciplinary actions, settlement agreements buried under non-disclosure clauses. Officer Ryan Keller's file was thick. 17 civilian complaints over 12 years. 8 involving allegations of racial profiling. 3 settlements paid out by the city, totaling over $140,000. None of which had resulted in meaningful discipline. Verbal warnings, retraining requirements, desk duty for 2 weeks, and then back on the street. One complaint described Keller stopping a black teenager 5 times in 6 months. Same kid, same block, never any charges filed. Another detailed a traffic stop where Keller had ordered a Latino family out of their car at gunpoint because their air freshener was suspicious. A third involved an elderly black woman who Keller had detained outside a grocery store, accusing her of shoplifting. Her receipt was in her hand the entire time. Every complaint had been reviewed. Every complaint had been minimized. Every complaint had been filed away. Until now, the investigation didn't stop with Keller. It expanded. Oversight boards subpoenaed department communications, emails, text threads, radio logs, body cam footage that had been conveniently corrupted or lost. Reporters began digging into the supervisors who had signed off on Keller's performance reviews year after year, despite the mounting evidence. Captain Brandt, who had praised Keller as dedicated and professional. Sergeant Haynes, who had dismissed multiple complaints as unfounded without conducting interviews. Lieutenant Graves, who had blocked an internal affairs recommendation for suspension 3 years earlier. All of them were now under scrutiny. All of them were being asked the same question. How did this go on for so long? And none of them had good answers. 2 weeks after the video leaked, Officer Ryan Keller was officially terminated. The department issued a terse statement citing conduct unbecoming of an officer and gross violations of departmental policy. Keller's union immediately filed a grievance, claiming the termination was politically motivated. But the video made that argument impossible to sustain, because the gun didn't lie, the cuffs didn't lie, and Nia Brooks' calm, measured voice, captured clearly on the recording, didn't lie either. The fallout spread beyond Keller. The city council convened an emergency session to review police funding. Community leaders demanded reallocation of resources. Activists called for systemic reform. The police chief, who had initially defended Keller in a press conference, was forced to resign under pressure. The mayor, who had praised the department's transparency, faced recall petitions. And the department itself, once seen as a model of suburban professionalism, was now synonymous with negligence, bias, and cover-ups. 3 weeks in, the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice announced it was opening a pattern or practice investigation into the entire department. That meant depositions, subpoenas, officers testifying under oath. And they did. Officer Miguel Vasquez, the younger cop who had arrived as backup, testified that he had felt uneasy the moment he saw the scene, but hadn't intervened because he feared retaliation from a senior officer. A veteran dispatcher admitted she had flagged Keller's stop as potentially problematic, but was told by a supervisor to let him handle it. A records clerk testified that multiple complaints against Keller had been reclassified from sustained to unfounded after pressure from department leadership. One by one, the institutional failures were exposed, not as isolated incidents, but as a system designed to protect officers at the expense of accountability. And then, the neighborhood was forced to speak. The residents of Sycamore Lane, who had watched from their windows, who had seen the gun, who had heard the confrontation, were subpoenaed to give statements. Some tried to claim they hadn't seen anything, but their Ring doorbell footage told a different story. One neighbor admitted she had assumed Nia was someone's housekeeper and hadn't thought twice about the stop. Another said he'd seen the gun, but figured the officer must have had a reason. A third, under oath, acknowledged that he had debated calling 911, but decided not to because I didn't want to cause trouble for the police. Their testimony wasn't malicious. It was something worse. It was indifference. The kind of passive complicity that allowed injustice to unfold in broad daylight while people watched and did nothing. Throughout all of it, the headlines, the investigations, the testimonies, Nia Brooks remained silent. She didn't give interviews. She didn't appear on cable news. She didn't release statements through her attorney. She simply let the process unfold because she didn't need to raise her voice. The facts spoke for themselves. The video spoke for itself. The law spoke for itself. But behind the scenes, Nia was working. She met with civil rights attorneys, reviewed body cam policies, consulted with legislative aides drafting new oversight bills. She wasn't interested in revenge. She was interested in reform. And unlike Keller, unlike the department, unlike the neighborhood that had stayed silent, Nia understood something fundamental. Power wasn't about the moment. It was about the precedent. 6 weeks after the arrest, the state legislature introduced the Accountability in Policing Act, a sweeping reform bill that mandated independent oversight, banned qualified immunity in civil rights cases, and required public disclosure of officer disciplinary records. It was nicknamed Nia's Law by the media, and it passed with bipartisan support. Keller's termination became permanent after his union appeal was denied. He was also charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, a federal crime carrying up to 10 years in prison. His trial was set for the following spring, and as the courtroom date approached, one truth became undeniable. Officer Ryan Keller had thought he was enforcing the law, but Justice Nia Brooks had shown him and the world what the law actually demanded. Not compliance, not silence, accountability. And that accountability was no longer optional. It was inevitable. This story isn't over yet. If you want to see what happens when Keller faces trial, and when Nia finally speaks publicly, subscribe now, drop a like, and comment below. Have you ever seen a system forced to face itself? Because that's exactly what's coming next. 6 months after the arrest, the hearing room was silent. Not the comfortable silence of respect, but the heavy, suffocating silence of consequences finally arriving. The room was sterile and formal. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting, a long table at the front where 3 commissioners sat with stacks of documents, laptops open, expressions unreadable. Rows of chairs filled the gallery, reporters, activists, department officials, attorneys. Every seat was taken. And at a small table on the left side of the room, stripped of his uniform, stripped of his badge, stripped of everything that had once made him untouchable, sat Ryan Keller. He wore a cheap gray suit that didn't fit quite right. His tie was crooked. His hands were folded on the table in front of him, but they trembled slightly. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like a man who had finally run out of places to hide. On the opposite side of the room, standing near the back with perfect posture and an expression of quiet resolve, was Justice Nia Brooks. She wore a navy blazer and a cream blouse. Elegant, composed, unchanged from a woman who had stood on her own front lawn that morning 6 months ago. Her hands were clasped in front of her. Her face revealed nothing. She didn't need to. The commissioners shuffled papers. The lead commissioner, a gray-haired woman named Dr. Elena Vasquez, cleared her throat and leaned toward the microphone. This hearing is now in session. We are here to review the findings of the independent investigation into the conduct of former Officer Ryan Keller on the morning of July 14th, 2025. She paused, glancing briefly at Keller, then at Nia. Before we proceed with testimony and recommendations, we will review the primary evidence. Dim the lights, please. The room darkened. A screen descended from the ceiling at the front of the room. And then the video began to play. No narration, no commentary, no editorializing. Just the raw, unfiltered truth. The patrol car pulling to the curb. Keller stepping out, hand already resting on his belt. Nia standing calmly in her own driveway, keys in hand. The questions laced with disbelief. The circling, the refusal to listen, and then the gun, clearing the holster, rising, pressing forward until it was inches from her temple. The room was utterly silent. Some people in the gallery looked away. Others leaned forward, faces tight with anger or disbelief. Keller stared down at the table, his jaw clenched, his breathing shallow. Nia watched the screen without flinching. She had seen it before, reviewed it dozens of times with attorneys, with investigators, with legislators. But watching it now, in this room, with the consequences finally unfolding, felt different. It felt like closure. The video continued. Keller's voice, loud and performative. Don't move. Nia's calm response. This is my home. The handcuffs clicking shut. The red blouse catching the light as she was guided into the back of the patrol car. The door slamming. When the video ended, the lights came back on slowly. Dr. Vasquez waited a long moment before speaking, her voice measured but edged with steel. The evidence is clear. The violations are extensive. The harm is undeniable. She glanced down at the report in front of her. Officer Keller, you detained Justice Brooks without probable cause. You brandished a firearm without justification. You violated her constitutional rights. And you did so with a pattern of similar conduct spanning over a decade. Keller's attorney started to speak, but Dr. Vasquez raised a hand. We've reviewed your client's history. 17 complaints, 8 involving racial profiling, 3 settlements, and not once was meaningful accountability imposed. She looked directly at Keller now. You were enabled, you were protected, and you were allowed to continue until you made a mistake you couldn't undo. Keller said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Dr. Vasquez turned to the other commissioners. They nodded in unison. This commission finds that former Officer Ryan Keller engaged in conduct that violated departmental policy, state law, and the constitutional rights of Justice Nia Brooks. We recommend the following actions. She read from the document, each word landing like a gavel strike. Permanent revocation of law enforcement certification. Referral for federal criminal prosecution. Public disclosure of disciplinary records. And a formal, public apology to Justice Brooks. Keller's head dropped. His attorney whispered something to him, but he didn't respond. It was over. Dr. Vasquez turned her attention to the gallery, her voice softening slightly, but losing none of its authority. Additionally, this commission recommends sweeping policy reforms, including mandatory bias training, independent oversight of use of force incidents, public accessibility of officer disciplinary records, and the establishment of a civilian review board with subpoena power. She paused, looking at Nia for the first time. Justice Brooks, on behalf of this commission and the community you serve, I want to say what should have been said 6 months ago. We are sorry. And we are committed to ensuring this never happens again. Nia inclined her head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, not absolution. Because apologies, she knew, were just words. It was the action that mattered. The hearing adjourned 20 minutes later. Reporters swarmed the hallway, shouting questions, cameras flashing. Keller's attorney pushed through the crowd, shielding his client from view as they disappeared down a side corridor. Nia exited through the main doors, flanked briefly by her legal team. But at the top of the courthouse steps, she paused and turned to face the cameras. The questions came all at once, overlapping, frantic. Justice Brooks, how do you feel about the outcome? Will you be pursuing further legal action? What do you want people to take away from this? Nia raised a hand, and the crowd quieted. She spoke clearly, her voice calm and unwavering. Today was not about revenge. It was about accountability. Power is not found in a badge or a gun. Power is found in the systems we build to ensure justice is applied equally to everyone without exception. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. The law always remembers, and it will hold us all, officers, officials, citizens, to the same standard. That is what justice demands, and that is what we must never stop fighting for. She didn't take any more questions. She simply turned, walked down the steps with quiet dignity, and got into a waiting car. An hour later, Nia Brooks stood once again on the front lawn of her home on Sycamore Lane. The Japanese maple had grown taller. Its burgundy leaves rustled softly in the breeze. The house stood exactly as it had 6 months ago, white columns gleaming, navy roof sharp against the sky. But something had changed. The street was different now. Neighbors who had once watched in silence now waved as they passed. A few had even stopped by in the weeks following the hearing. Apologies murmured, casseroles offered, quiet acknowledgments of their own complicity. Nia had accepted them graciously, because accountability wasn't just for officers. It was for everyone. She walked up the porch steps, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The house was peaceful now, truly peaceful. Music, not because the world had changed overnight, but because she had stood her ground. She had refused to be erased. She had demanded that the system she had dedicated her life to upholding would uphold her in return. And it had, not because it wanted to, but because she had made it impossible not to. Nia set her keys on the entry table, poured herself a glass of water, and walked to the back window overlooking the garden. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the lawn. And for the first time in 6 months, Nia Brooks exhaled, not in relief, but in resolve, because she knew the work wasn't finished. There would be more cases, more fights, more moments where power tried to silence justice. But she also knew this. Power isn't a gun. Power is accountability. And the law, when wielded with courage, when defended with conviction, always remembers. Always. If this story moved you, subscribe, hit that like button, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell us, what does justice look like to you? Because stories like this, they're not just entertainment. They're reminders. And the world needs more of them.